Hello, I hope that you are doing well. If you are clicking on this video, you are interested in seeing me go through the preparation process for defending my dissertation. Essentially, what I have in front of me is my dissertation defense presentation that I've already submitted, and then I also have my talk track. My goal is to record on the platform that will be used uh, on the day of defense to get familiar with the background, with the layout, I should say, and practice until I'm comfortable enough to not use my talk track 100% of the time. So these videos are going to be raw in terms of reactions or mistakes. This won't be perfect. Again, it is to build my sense of confidence in presenting the materials. In an earlier video, I have shared some of the things that I did to prepare for my dissertation defense, which is things like watching videos of dissertation defenses on topics similar to mine and not similar to mine, even watching through until the end where the board asks questions to kind of know what types of questions to anticipate, upload my dissertation into Google Docs, use the comment feature to highlight parts of my dissertation that I thought were important, and then share that document with friends, family, and professional mentors to get their feedback on places where I should highlight, and use that to create a talk track for which I will be reading from throughout preparing. I do feel somewhat confident going into it for the first time, but overall I feel confident about my dissertation defense because I know after a few practices I'll be fine. So with that being said, we will get into my first session of preparation. Good afternoon. I'm glad to have made it to the point of defending my dissertation. My name is Jeremy and I'm elated to share my research with you. First, I have to give major thanks to Dr. Riley, Dr. Cronin Gilmore for the grace that you've shown throughout the program. You're very aware of the ups and downs that I've had throughout the program, including significant job changes, death, and topic changes. It was nothing short of your grace that allowed me to get through the program and feel confident about my ability to share my research with you. I'm all the more confident based on the feedback that you've provided to help my research be better. The topics listed on this slide will outline the what we'll cover today. My personal interest and problem statement to understand the frame to frame my choice and research, the literature review to discuss the bodies of knowledge relevant to my research, research design, how I went about conducting my research, quantitative results, to discuss the statistical analysis, summary of key findings to discuss points that are critically important, implication and limitations to discuss impacts of my research and how it could be improved, future research and next steps, to discuss adjustments to replication of this work, and my personal and professional plans. To help you understand my choice in research, for the past 17 years, I've worked in 3 Fortune 500 companies, and starting off in customer-facing roles. These roles were people facing. It required a lot of people interaction, eventually leading me to experience stress and burnout. Burnout was actually the catalyst for me to seek something different where I could contribute differently and maybe experience something a little bit more fulfilling. Early into my tenure with my current employer, I used the HR tools and resources available to help orient me towards something that was more aligned with me, something that I may not have had exposure to or even knew existed. Through the use of these tools and resources, this is where I found human resources to be a right fit for me. To make myself competitive, eventually I went through undergraduate school and graduate school. One of the programs was Bellevue University's Master of Science in Industrial and Organizational Psychology, where I was exposed to emotional intelligence. After graduate school, multiple rounds of interviews, lots of no's, I eventually made it into HR, where I found a sense of fulfillment in my daily work. And even though I had a sense of fulfillment, I was still being exposed to stress on a regular basis, a high stress. My problem statement really frames stress as a common experience amongst those who do people work. Specifically, I wanted to understand the experience of HR professionals. Let's break down my problem statement, the research question, and theoretical framework. HR, helping professionals have an outward focus by helping other people, and they are constantly interacting with people. HR professionals could be categorized as helping professionals similar to those that work in healthcare, education, and or are priests. HR has evolved significantly from administrative processes to helping executives make really strategic decisions that have broad implications. We could look at HR work on two different axes, present and future. One axis, and then another axis would be people versus process. This leads to dynamic foci, competing priorities, and balancing the role of HR professionals with helping the business get what they need done without negative implications. An example of the work that HR does that is really significant to companies can be found in 10K forms. For example, in Amazon or Walmart, or even Verizon, in the risk section, talent is often highlighted, and talent is one of the major streams of work that HR professionals do. The nature of HR's roles expose them to constant stress. So when we think about stress, 83% of the U.S. workforce has experienced work-related stress. In fact, the cost in 2019 for stress was about $300 billion to U.S. businesses. Although there's no universal definition of what stress is, it's widely researched and has evolved as a body of knowledge heavily focusing on helping professions. Burnout, we experience when we're chronically exposed to stress. We can develop burnout, which manifests physically, mentally, and emotionally. Burnout has the potential to have a negative life altering impacts such as insomnia or accidents. When evaluating research on stress and burnout, there was a lack of understanding of how HR professionals are prepared for and deal with stress, and equally, if not more important, burnout. This is why emotional intelligence was important to help find that answer. It's a heavily researched topic, and again, critical to this research. To address the gap, my dissertation uses the conservation of resource theory to explain the relationship between stress and burnout, controlling for the effects of emotional intelligence. I'll now walk you through my literature review to discuss research on the bodies of knowledge relevant to my topic. The conservation of resources theory. My research draws upon this theory to help frame my research to understand the actions that people take in certain circumstances. The conservation of resources theory suggests that people take action to protect, build, or retain resources that they deem valuable. What the individual deems as valuable is really up to them. It could be materialistic or not. It could be a condition or even characteristics. There are really three pillars to the conservation of resources theory. One, the threat of net loss of resources, the actual net loss of resources, and the lack of resource gain following the investment of the resource. What's interesting about the conservation of resource theory is that it's triggered by stress for action. The conservation of resource theory is researched with variables in this study. For example, occupational stress, burnout, you've seen that. I've seen that in research about the conservation of resource theory, and even organizational citizenship behavior and job performance. Studies show that people took action to mitigate the loss of something. Occupational stress. We experience stress when what's required of us is taxing or more than our capacity permits. Simply put, what's being asked of us is more than the capacity that we have to give. Originally, stress was focused on as a physiological process and later a psychological phenomenon as embraced by psychologists who connected emotions to what they were observing. Major events such as World War I and World War II are indicators for changes in how stress is viewed. People were coming back from war, and people were observing their physical symptoms, but not their psychological symptoms. Stress in the workplace, or occupational stress, is heavily researched and correlated with many things such as job satisfaction, sales performance, employee turnover, and organizational performance. The types of participants used in research on work stress are healthcare professionals, hospitality and service workers, marketing professionals, educators, IT professionals, again, helping professionals. And when looking at stress on individuals, stress can show up in sickness, absences, work-related injuries, turnover, mental and physical well-being, aggressive communication, and even bullying. Essentially, people become less effective at their work when they are stressed. When looking at stress in the workplace, it can happen as a result of poor communication, insufficient resources, conflicts and taking away resources, which is viewed as a stressor. The root causes, alone or together, is what causes individuals to experience stress. Unfavorable outcomes for the workplace, reduced efficiencies, increased turnover, increased healthcare costs and accidents, and even results in low motivations. When looking at stress interventions, they're really critical to mitigating stress in the workplace. Essentially, one would want to identify the top causes. When looking at stress interventions, they can happen in three ways: identifying the top causes and minimizing the employee exposure to those causes, enabling individuals to deal with the stress, which can be done psychologically or educational, which are psychological or educational in nature, for example, relaxation rooms or trainings. And then the last one is post-stress intervention. When looking at burnout, it is again what we experience after chronic exposure to high stress. Research in this area was catalyzed in response to the poverty issues that were happening in the 1960s. People had a lot of optimism about resolving poverty, but were met with a lot of bureaucracy when trying to solve for it. This led to research in human services starting around the 70s. And basically, stress is an ongoing phenomenon even till this day. When we look at burnout on the individual, the three dimensions of burnout are emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and reduced sense of personal achievement, which are linked together and really compounding. Certain professionals are more likely to experience burnout than others. For example, helping professionals who deal with death in life. Burnout can be or have a personal, social, organizational, or economic cost. And burnout really can show up in many ways. For example, in personal distress, physical exhaustion, insomnia, increased use of alcohol and drugs, and marital family problems. When looking at burnout in the workplace, interactions can influence burnout. People interactions, ideally, the more pleasant people interactions are, the less likely one is to experience burnout. And it's also even contingent upon managerial support. One example, one model that I'd like to highlight is the areas of work-life model, which offers 6 positive fits to help workplace engagement and well-being, basically helping the workplace be a better place for employees to take action. We're looking at interventions for burnout. Burnout interventions focused on the person or the job itself. They should be strategic or organizational level, preferred for the interventions to be strategic or organizational level in nature. Personal level interventions can be like yoga, team building, or mindfulness practices. Strategic level interventions can address root causes and inform culture or workplace environment. And it needs to be proactive in addressing the job itself. When looking at emotional intelligence, broadly, EI is when people can discern changes in emotions and make better decisions. Research is divided into two bodies of work: ability, emotional intelligence, and trait, emotional intelligence. Mayer and Salovey align with emotional intelligence being a mental ability. Others align with EI being a combination of traits, characteristics, and skills. Emotional intelligence has been linked to many positive organizational outcomes. For example, job satisfaction, job performance, mitigation of burnout, and occupational stress. Emotional intelligence has four dimensions, which can be categorized as self-emotional appraisal, other emotional appraisal, regulation of emotion, and use of emotion. Emotional intelligence in the workplace can be seen can have a negative association with turnover and stress, and it can be positively associated with job satisfaction, negotiation outcomes, and team performance. It's important that EI be something that is very significant in the workplace, given the constant social interactions that people have. It really helps people to know how to navigate one another in circumstances, and is really based on an established culture. When we look at emotional intelligence and human resources has played a role in assessing or leveraging emotional intelligence to help organizations, but it's not been focused on the HR professional themselves. High performance HR activities are often informed by the emotional intelligence of the HR professional, which has been associated with positive organizational outcomes. Emotional intelligence can be developed and is constantly linked to competitive advantage, which suggests a huge benefit to invest in the emotional intelligence of HR professionals. The world is changing, and so is the ask of HR. The world is becoming more data driven, and there's a lot of research that links HR emotional intelligence to shape the way that data or information is used. The demands of HR are changing, and HR is needed. For example, in assessing job descriptions, using data, or varying skills such as even accounting. I would, based on research, improvement in quality of life could be an outcome for HR professionals if they are targeted, the target audience for emotional intelligence development. My research builds on what we've discussed by examining burnout and stress and emotional intelligence by focusing on the HR professional. This non-experimental quantitative study aimed to answer my question. My sample consisted of over 200 HR professionals based in the United States recruited from the prolific research platform. Data was collected in Qualtrics, and I used three instruments that were cited in research and tested in SPSS for high validity and reliability. The instruments that I used are the Wong Law Emotional Intelligence Scale, the Perceived Occupational Stress Scale, and the Maslow Burnout Inventory. Data was analyzed via regression analysis, which allows statistical variation to be identified between the independent and dependent variable. Moderation regression analysis evaluated the emotional intelligence as the moderator variable in the relationship between the stress independent variable and burnout dependent variable. Multiple regression analysis is used to evaluate the three dimensions of burnout, specifically emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and the reduced sense of accomplishment, all three as the dependent variable, and occupational stress and emotional intelligence as the independent variable. Key findings from our research start with descriptive statistics. The table to the top left corner highlights age, HR experience, firm tenure, and firm size. I thought it was interesting to call out that the age range from 19 to 77 with an average age of 38.38. The most frequent HR experience was 2 years, as well as the most frequent firm tenure was 2 years. The maximum size of firms that was reported by participants was 65,000. The table to the bottom left corner, highlights the majority of participants were female, fell in the age range of 26 to 35, followed by 36 to 45. And as seen in the table to the right, almost half participants had less than 5 years experience in HR, and more than half had less than 5 year tenure with their firm. Half of participants sit in HR models where everyone had certain specialties that they focused on, specifically the HR resources function structure. SPSS was used to ensure assumptions for moderation analysis were met, and as a result found the interaction effect showed stress and emotional intelligence were not significant predictors of burnout, although separately emotional intelligence reflected a negative statistically significant effect on burnout, and stress reflected a positive statistically significant effect on burnout. When looking at the interaction effect, the p-value shows greater than 0.05, and the confidence interval included 0. Emotional intelligence is not a significant moderator of the relationship between stress and burnout. SPSS was used to ensure assumptions for multiple regression analysis were met, and as a result found emotional intelligence and stress of participants were significant positive predictors of each dimension of burnout. The most significant positive prediction was emotional intelligence and stress, accounting for 65% change in emotional exhaustion. For every unit increase of emotional intelligence by 1 standard deviation, emotional exhaustion increased by 0.143. And additionally, for every unit increase of stress by 1 standard deviation, emotional exhaustion increased by 0.757. In summary, my findings suggest a statistically significant relationship between stress and burnout. This was an expected result based on research. Every unit increase in stress, burnout was negatively influenced by 0.47. The more stressed someone is, the more likely they are to experience burnout. A statistically significant relationship between emotional intelligence and burnout was found. This was also an expected result based on research. For every unit increase in emotional intelligence, burnout was positively influenced by 0.39. The higher someone's emotional intelligence, the less likely they are to experience burnout. When evaluating the hypotheses, the first one, we failed to reject the null hypotheses as emotional intelligence had no statistically significant effect on the stress and burnout relationship. This was an unexpected result based on research. And what I derived from that is awareness of stress does not equate to action to mitigate burnout. Workplace tasks of HR professionals are deemed more valuable than their risk to burnout. HR outputs, as we've seen in research, are critically important to the business, and thus HR professionals may push through their stress to get work done. When we look at the remaining hypotheses, we reject the remaining hypotheses. Emotional intelligence had a statistically significant effect on each of the 3 dimensions of burnout. This was an expected result based on research. This contrasts filling the first hypotheses, but could be understood as one's awareness of stress while being able to acknowledge aspects of burnout, yet not taking action to avoid it. The workplace and expectations of HR may limit the HR professional's ability to take action to mitigate burnout. These findings have implications, one for which I'll highlight. If organizations want HR professionals to prioritize tasks over their well-being, change nothing. Work is getting done. If that is not the case, organizations should create a culture that promotes well-being and reinforces policies that support this, so as people make decisions, they take action to prioritize their well-being. The HR professionals should feel comfortable taking action to protect what they deem as valuable, which is the state of non-stress or good well-being. I'll highlight one methodical and researcher-based limitation. At the time of administering this survey, HR activities such as performance reviews, compensation planning, or other major organizational changes could skew results, given those are critical inputs into the business that indirectly would need to be prioritized. Taking surveys at a certain time of the year will yield the same results if these critical HR activities are happening. As the researcher, I work in HR and I have my own personal experience with chronic exposure to high stress in certain HR roles, leading me to develop blind spots in interpreting results. Future research could build on these findings, evaluating trait emotional intelligence compared to ability emotional intelligence. Another one could be using other instruments and scales for the variables in this study, focusing on a specific industry or specific tenure range of HR professionals. In looking at next steps, this research process has been a continuous workout and investment of a lot of resources. My goal would be to seek support in publishing my work, as this could propel my career forward. Also, I'm happy to report that I started a new role in selection and assessment and was given kudos, for which I credit this program and research experience. My goal in corporate America is to become an executive in HR, helping shape culture that focuses on well-being and unlocking people potential. In conclusion, the dissertation contributes to the understanding of emotional intelligence and its effect on the stress and burnout relationship amongst HR professionals. The findings highlight the possibility of HR professionals being aware of their stress, yet prioritizing critical HR activities that are inputs into the business over their personal well-being. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. All right, so I am gone through, I don't know how long that was. I'm going to say maybe 15 minutes. I think 20 might be stretching it. So I think for me, I need to pace myself more. I think about 30 to 40 minutes is being dedicated to this. So I will pace myself more. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording and I'm going to upload this. Obviously, this was a practice run, so I know that I had some hiccups there. But what I can say is, because I was practicing this before I started recording, I had more of a flow. So I'll be looking forward to doing this multiple times, so that way I can look into the camera and have a conversation, as opposed compared to looking back and forth at what's being presented in my notes. So thank you for going along on this journey with me. This is the first of many takes of me preparing for my dissertation defense. Have a great day.